welcome back to week 4, colors cutting. Week 4 of our Polaris Quilt Along. My name is Holly and Knight, and it is my job to guide you to quilt with confidence. Rockstars, I am so excited because this morning we are going to work on flying geese together. So as you know, when we have these quilt alongs at String and Story, what is so fun about them is that we get to go step by step together and go through all the bits and pieces of making a quilt pattern. So together we are making right now Polaris. This is a wonderful traditional pattern that allows you to practice several different triangle units, and I love getting to take you through them one by one. Now, I am unable to talk and type at the same time, so bear with me for just a second. I am gonna pull up my laptop so that I can see y'all. If you are here with me live, do go ahead and say hi in the chat so that I can say good morning. Good morning, continuing on. Good morning, Kathy Marco. Good morning, Susan Berry and others. Charlotte, I see you. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome. As you can see, I've been running around doing many things this morning. Post-marathon, I am back to training, so I had my first interval workout this morning. It was very exciting. All right. I'm clearly still catching my breath. Let's dive in. Now, a quick review. During week 1, we talked about choosing our colors for Polaris. Now, Polaris, as you can see from the cover of our quilt, is written, well, this actually illustrates 5 colors. It's written for 4 colors. So you have 2 colors for the stars, right? You have a color for your cornerstones, and you have a background. But one of the things that got me really excited about doing this quilt along together is the opportunity to work on this scrappy, okay? So during week 1, we talked about choosing colors and how to make pairs so that in a quilt this size with 30 blocks, you'll have 15 different blocks, 2 of each unique fabric pairing. Then in the next week, we talked about cutting and especially talked about if you were using fat quarters in order to have that scrappy effect, how you would do that cutting and how to organize your quilt project. Last week, we made some quarter square triangles together. And I'm gonna pull out my blocks that I have quarter square triangles for here. I feel like I have an odd number. Thought I had one more done. Interesting. And today we are gonna make flying geese. Now, for our flying geese, we're gonna need our squares. So remember, we cut big squares, smaller squares, and rectangles out of each of our star fabrics. So I need those smaller squares. The rectangles, of course, are going to go here, and we use the big squares to make our quarter square triangles. And then I'm going to need some squares cut out of my background fabric. Now I'm going to do a wee bit of cutting real quick from my background because I cut strips out of mine. I have a tendency to do this with my cutting. I get really excited about cutting out the pretty fabrics. And then the background, I do like the first part of the cutting, and I tend to do a lot of my sub-cutting as I'm going along. So we're gonna do a little bit of that together. Let me see who else is here. Hey, Janice in Colorado. Christy in Tampa. Hello, is SEAPD 33. Karen Dolan, Jennifer Ash. Good to see y'all. Good morning, good morning, good morning. How is y'all's stuff going so far, right? Fill me in while I rethread my machine, because I changed thread colors. Fill me in on how y'all's quarter square triangles went last week. Are there any lingering questions that I can answer while I'm threading this and doing my sub cutting before we jump into our next unit? Hello, Susan Ruff. It is good to see you. Susan, I did flying sprints this morning. And oh, let me see if I can see the text that I sent Hubster, because you'll appreciate this. Let's see. Yeah, so apparently, oh, Havana just turned off my light. That is very annoying. Apparently, my current max pace at 1% incline is a 5:27 mile. So there's that. Susan is a fellow runner, so we always have to swap the running deets. All right. Oh my gosh, Susan said, I love this pattern and it's turning out to be my best quilt ever. Susan, I'm so honored. That is like the greatest compliment that you could have given me as a pattern writer. Thank you so much. Oh my gosh. Sandy in the Catskills, that's amazing. Jan says, I'm putting blocks together. Some of y'all have been sharing blocks over in the Quilting Rockstars Facebook group, and some of y'all have been tagging me here on Instagram. Y'all are incredible. Oh my gosh, I'm loving it. Okay, let's do a quick bit of stud cutting so that we have the squares we need. And I'm gonna start by taking my selvage off. I know I'm standing kind of weirdly off to the side. Bear with me for just a second. Slice that selvage off. Just know that if you also do this, you get kind of distracted when it comes to cutting the background, you are not alone, my dear. Okay, there we go. That'll be enough for now. So you're gonna take that larger square, right? This is the same size square that we use for our quarter square triangles. Same thing, it's oversized, and we're gonna end up trimming these down, okay? Susan says, I'm behind on Polaris, but made a purse for my daughter yesterday. It's amazing, Susan. I love that. All right, and you're gonna take the 4 smaller squares for one color, okay? And lay them diagonal. Oh, I need pins. Oh, good, I can grab pins and plug my light back in all at the same time. My light cord is just barely long enough to reach. There we go. So you're gonna put them on the diagonal. I'm gonna pin these in place, and then I'm gonna hold it up so you can see properly, because I know that it is hard to see when I'm over here at the side. You know, the throat space on this B08 is just so big that, you know, it fills in the whole camera frame. All right, that's a little bit cattywampus. Let's make it not cattywampus. And again, taking the time to pin these, you can imagine, is not my favorite, but it is worth it. Okay, so see how I have these arranged on the diagonal? Because we are gonna make 2 at a time geese, okay? So on the diagonal, I have them pinned, and then I'm gonna draw a line corner to corner. I literally use like a number 2 pencil for this. If your fabric is really dark, you can use chalk or ceramic. I'm gonna give you the same speech I gave you last week. Please do not put ink anywhere near your quilts. Not friction pens, not washable markers, not pink, yellow, or blue chalk, nothing that has dye in it. Please, I beg you, I have heard every horror story in the book, okay? If it has dye in it, there is always a chance that it will stain, okay? So my favorite marking tools are number 2 pencil, so uncolored graphite, plain graphite, white chalk pencil, white ceramic pencil, or a Hera marker where you're simply making a crease in your fabric, all right? Jen said, I bought the kit and we'll have enough to make a second quilt in the stars. Need to get more background on the cornerstones, but we'll mix it up differently. Jam, we just made a second, let's see if I can, where is it? Is it on the shelf where I can see it? We just made, here it is, it's right behind me. We just made a Polaris kit out of the Fableisms with a black background. This is, I think it's obsidian from the Sprout Wovens with like a creamy taupe cornerstone. So that might be an idea that you could make like a dark version. I think it would look so good. All right. Once we have drawn that line, we're gonna sew 1/4 inch on either side of the line. I'm gonna move the foot pedal over so I don't have to stretch and reach my toe so far. And again, just like with your quarter square triangles, I'm doing these one at a time to show you, but when you're making these at home, like literally pin and mark all of them, and then just feed these through your machine in a big long chain, okay? If you've never done them this way before, make 1 or 2 one at a time so you know what you're doing. And like I said, then just chain piece them, okay? I'm gonna break threads and show them one at a time just because that's gonna make it a lot easier for y'all, all right? So 1/4 inch to either side of that line, just like so. You can see it on that side, okay? And then you're gonna split it up the middle. And if you find it easier, as I tend to, pull those pins out before you make that center cut. Oh yes, Jan, feel free to send me an email. That sounds delightful. I am happy to help you pick out quilt number 2. I think something that I really like about the Polaris quilt is that it lends itself really well to chain piecing, right? So we've done a couple of quilt alongs so far this year. We did Lanterns of Hope. What I loved about Lanterns of Hope is there's a lot of different blocks, so it's easy to have quilt snacks and sit down and be like, I'm gonna make one block, right? And you just work your way through that block, and then you're like, look, I made like a whole 1/15 of the quilt, and then you can go on about your merry way. Kind of similarly with Dogwood Blossoms, that it kind of lent itself that if you wanted to sit down and just make one block, you could. Now, the way that we've kitted these up, and I've organized them block by block, you can absolutely do that with Polaris. But I think what's really special about Polaris, because there's so many different blocks, is that it lends itself to chain piecing, and lends itself to being like, ooh, I've got a couple hours, I'm gonna sit down, I'm gonna make all my flying geese. Oh, I've got a couple hours, I'm gonna sit down and make all my quarter square triangles. And then before you know it, you have all the units and the block comes together really, really quickly, which is big fun. All right, pressing. Over here on the side, look, y'all can almost see what I'm doing this week. So we're gonna set that seam, just like we talked about last week. And then I like to actually take my fingers, try not to scorch them, and tease the fabric over before I hit it with the iron. And that's to make sure that I get all of that fabric pressed with the seam, okay? If you have a clapper, this is an ideal time to slap a clapper on here, suck all that heat back out, and get a really crispy press, okay? This is the Aliso Mini Iron, Susan. It is delightful. It has a little light. It comes with the silicone mat, and it has an on-off button. So it's easy to toggle on and off so it doesn't sit and just generate heat over here when I'm not using it. It heats up really fast. That was one of my big complaints with the original Aliso Mini, is that it would just, just sit there and just baking your surface, because even though it has the silicone mat to keep from scorching, it's still generating a lot of heat. But they solved that with this new one by having that on-off button, because it cools down and heats up pretty quick. We don't carry these regularly in the store, but I can special order them. So if you are interested in one, send me an email, and I can let you know what colors are available and how much they cost. And then it's a couple of weeks from order to receiving it. All right, click off my iron. And I have what I call little fox faces, right? This is the halfway point of our geese. I said 2 at a time earlier. I clearly have not had enough coffee. It's 4 at a time, because we're doing 2 blocks. So there's 2 in this block, and then there's 2 in the other matching block. Let's see if I can I play the matching game for a second? Let's see. I spread these out really well on this quilt. Okay, well, y'all get my point. All right, so we're gonna take our little fox faces, and we have 2 more squares. Each fox face is going to become 2 flying geese. Who remembers the clap on, clap off clappers for your lights? One of my friends had those when I was in like 2nd grade, and I thought that was the coolest thing. Absolutely remember. Oh yes, I've quilted for years. Explain a clapper to me. Let me go grab mine, and I will, because I have one over here. All right, if you do not have a clapper, my favorite clapper is from Modern American Vintage, okay? This is not my Modern American Vintage clapper, but we're gonna use it for a demo. So when you are pressing, right, what happens in order for your fabric to change shape is the heat from your iron essentially makes the fibers more flexible, and then it sets them into a new position, like so. Now, because of humidity, etc., it is often the impulse of the fibers to then curl back up a little bit. In order to make this seam really, really crisp, you can use a clapper, put it on there, and you put a little pressure on with your hand. What I like about my Modern American Vintage clapper is it is quite heavy, so I can press for a second and then leave it, right? And what's gonna happen is the wood absorbs, like this is now warm to the touch. The wood absorbs the heat back out of those fibers and sets it in this position, okay? Think about how, like, if you're curling your hair and, you know, you curl it with the curling wand and you may hold it kind of in that curled position for a minute until it finishes cooling, and then you let it drop. Because if your hair is still warm and gravity pulls it down, it stretches the curve, and then it cools in that stretched position. But if you leave it up here in a tighter position, right, then it's going to cool in a tighter curl, and you're gonna have a shorter, tighter curl. Same idea with hot rollers, right? You roll them in while they're hot, you let them cool in those nice tight curls, and then when you pull the hot rollers out, you're left with a tighter curl. So what we're doing is we're speeding up that process by pulling the heat back out with a piece of wood so that we get a nice crisp press, right? Great question. I'm so glad that you asked it. All right, so each of our little fox faces are going to become 2 geese. So take that final smaller square and position it in the opposite corner. Place your pins. Y'all, I have an unpopular opinion. I like shorter, thicker pins. These are a little bit thin for me. They're a little floppy. They make me a little crazy. All right, and then you mark corner to corner. We're gonna do the same thing with the other little fox face. So take your little fox face, position your square, boop. Mark corner to corner. Y'all aren't gonna be able to see that line, but I can see it. All right, and we're gonna sew 1/4 inch down either side. Now, there's 2 this time, so I'm gonna chain piece them. Chain piecing means feeding pieces one after the other into your machine. And there's usually 1 or 2 stitches worth of thread between the 2 pieces, okay? So I stitch just off the end of my first piece, and then I slide my second piece in, like so. Now I can actually, do I have snips? These are very scissors. These scissors are a little big for the job, but they'll do. We can actually snip those threads from behind and feed that first piece in again. So what this does, that means that you don't have any long thread tails in between your pieces. So it saves a little bit of thread. It also saves time. Like if you're feeding all of your flying geese through your machine and you feed them through one after the other. I remember when I first started quilting, chain piecing was really like hyping in the modern quilting world. And folks were timing themselves that if they sewed one piece at a time and cut thread in between versus if they chain pieced, and it's something like 20% faster. Like it's much more efficient. Plus that little bit of thread that you're saving up each time, that adds up, right? Thread economy is not my primary motivating factor. I like the time economy, and it's just less floundery, but that is good to keep in mind, all right? And then we cut on that line again, and you're starting to be able to see our little goosey geese, all right? Same thing, we're gonna let my iron heat up real quick. It doesn't take but a second, thank goodness. And so here, since I grabbed my clapper, I can show you what I usually do, right? So I will press this really good. Now I have 2 ironing board covers on this iron at the moment for no good reason other than I didn't particularly care for the original one, and rather than taking it off and putting it away, I just put a second ironing cover on top of it. So my ironing board is a little squishy at the moment. I like a good firm ironing surface, especially with the clapper. But that's a bit of a side note. So you can see what I did is I pressed one piece and then I leave it under the clapper while I press the next piece. And I can just feed these through. And that clapper just helps keep my pieces nice and flat while they cool. So I end up with a little bit of a crispier finish. And then we just have to trim these little geese. Any questions about making these flying geese so far? This is my personal favorite method for making flying geese these days. It helps minimize your biased edges. It's very efficient. There's not a lot of waste. It leaves just enough room around the edge to trim, but not enough to really get you into trouble, as we might say. All right. Now, these need to be trimmed. And the big thing when you're trimming these is we want to keep in mind the 1/4 inch seam allowance that is right here in between the tip of your little goose. There's so many, like, is this the goose and these are the wings? Whatever. But anyway, we're gonna call this the goose. Between your goose and your edge, right? That's your seam allowance. You want that to be 1/4 of an inch so that your points are safe later. All right? So we're trimming to 2.5 by 4.5. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start by just laying my ruler over and seeing how much I've got. I've got about 1/4 of an inch in every direction, okay? So I'm gonna do just like we did last week, and I'm not pulling down like on a 45-degree angle so much, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna slide my ruler so that I am at 4 5/8 and 2 5/8 down one side, okay? Making sure that I have 1/4 of an inch between that point and the edge of my ruler. I'm gonna position this on the grid so I can make sure I'm trimming pretty square too. Whoop. Okay, trim 2 sides. If you have a block lock ruler for trimming 2 by 4 inch flying geese, use it. It will make your life easier. I have one somewhere. It is not here at the moment. If you do not have a block lock ruler and you are interested in getting one, check out my friends at 5 Little Monkeys Quilting. They have a great collection of block lock, okay? All right, and then we flip the, notice I was trimming this way, right? And now I'm gonna trim this way to trim the other 2 sides. Now I'm gonna put this at my actual unfinished size, so 2.5 by 4.5. Again, making sure I have 1/4 of an inch between my edge and that point. That is the most important part, okay? And here my 45-degree line is actually parallel to the angle of my little goose as well, which is very convenient. And then trim the other 2 sides. You're not necessarily trimming the exact same amount off of each side, but you want to make sure that you preserve that 1/4 of an inch, okay? Ta-da! Let's trim some more. All right, so line it up, see how much extra I have. This one has more extra. Wow, this one actually has a lot more extra. Okay, so we're gonna go, well, not really. So like you might take more off the bottom than the top in order to keep your seam allowance intact, right? All right, Jan says, I have Eleanor Burns Flying Geese ruler. I haven't set the proper size to trim it. Yes, that's a great ruler. The other ruler that we have that I like too, if you want a tool that will work for multiple sizes of flying geese, is this Creative Grids Ultimate Flying Geese tool. And of course I left mine down in the classroom, so I'm not trimming with it at the moment. But it basically has 2 different sides that you use to trim the 2 different parts of the geese, and that works really, really well. So Creative Grids Ultimate Flying Geese tool, that's one that we carry in store. We've got several in stock. And what I like about that is that it works for all of the sizes, right? So there's a few different options depending on what works for you. If you make a lot of flying geese, you may want to be able to trim them all. All right, let's see. Final size, final size. Line up that angle. Yep. All right. 2 little trimmed goosies. 2 more. And you'll notice some variation in, you know, how much you need to take off from goose to goose. And that's just going to reflect, you know, small wobbles in either your marking line or how well you sewed 1/4 inch from that marking line. And that's okay, right? Like, that's why we make them big and trim them down. Is because when you're sewing on the bias like that, it's tricky for things not to move and wiggle and whatnot. And so we give ourselves margin for error, and then we trim it off later. Last one. Yeah, like I'm mostly just taking the dog ear off the top here. Right, I'm just leveling off that top edge, and then I'm taking some of the extra off the bottom. And same thing, like I said, you can use that same 45-degree line on your ruler that we used last week for those 1/4 square triangles. You can line that up along the edge of the little goose wing. This ruler is so slippy. And it'll make sure that you're trimming everything nice and square. All right, there you have it, folks. 4 at a time Flying Geese plus trimming. Dot says, I have the String Story original clapper and love it. Any chance you'll be making any more large clappers? Oh, Dot, you were one of the lucky few who snagged one of those String Story clappers. There were not very many of them. So I dream of partnering with my friend over at Modern American Vintage and doing some clappers that way. We have both been very busy this year, so it has not happened yet. But even though they are not String Story branded, I would check out his stuff. Like, his clappers are stunning. He's at Festival right now, so I don't know if he has anything listed online. But keep an eye afterwards for anything that's left. And then I believe he's coming to QuiltCon in the spring. So go there like first. He sells out within a day or two, always, because his clappers are so good. He makes big square clappers, he makes long ones. They're amazing. Do I use a scant 1/4 inch seam to sew? On this machine, it is a scant 1/4 inch seam. I use a more of a full 1/4 inch seam when I'm on the B77. So that varies a little bit from machine to machine with me. I have to keep that in mind if I do need, like, going back and forth between machines. When you're sewing and then trimming down, a scant 1/4 inch seam is going to make your life so much easier because you'll have more room for trimming. Great question. Modern American Vintage Dot. His name is Chris, and he's fabulous. Yeah. If your pattern doesn't show making 2 at a time, how much larger do you cut your fabric? If you head to the blog for this week for Flying Geese, which I will be putting up in my story when we finish our live, I believe there's a chart on there for 2 at a time geese. That can be really helpful if you're making this truly from scraps and you're not getting 2 necessarily full blocks out of every pair of fabric. Yeah, great question. Awesome. Any other questions about these 4 at a time Flying Geese? Y'all, after this, everything is squares. Have you thought about that? We are so close to assembling these blocks. After this week, you will have all of your 1/4 square triangles, and you will have all of your geese. And next week, we're going to talk about this unit here, and then it's going to be time to put everything together. How exciting! All right. And I'll share Modern American Vintage's stuff up to my stories as well. So remember, anytime we are live here together for the Polaris Quilt Along, after we do this live, I always put lots of resources up in my Instagram stories. We have lots of resources linked on the Quilt Along blog as well, so we want to make it nice and easy for y'all to find everything. Jan says, are you going to be doing another sew along for the new year? Yes. Clara and I. So Clara is my online business manager. Even if you have not spoken directly with Clara via email, you have interacted with the magic that Clara does for us because you're part of this so long. And Clara's in charge of making sure that things like emails go out on time. So on Mondays, when you get those emails that send resources for this quilt along, or this morning when you got a reminder that we have a Q&A, Clara works all of that magic. So Clara and her husband and their baby Yuna, who is very cute, you can see pictures in my Instagram stories, are in town this week. We're doing some photos and things, but one of the things that we did is we sat down and we planned next year. And we've got 2025, I would say like 75% blocked out, and there will be 4 quilt-alongs next year. I'm so excited. Yay, okay. Rockstars, thank you so much for joining me. It has been fabulous making Flying Geese with you. Be sure to check out the extra resources I will put up in my stories as we wrap up, and I will see you back here next week in order to continue our quilt along. Before we go, one more shameless plug. We have gotten lots of new fabric into the store. We've gotten a number of different Ruby Star Society lines. We have Woodland Wonder by Gingerbread for Moda. We have Maeve from Moda, and we also have Forest Forage will be up tomorrow. So if you are looking at some more projects before the end of the year, go ahead and check those out and continue shopping small with us. Awesome. Thanks, y'all. I'll see you soon.